I've been coming through here my whole life because my father was from Vina. Do y'all know where Vina is? They had reunions every year in October, so we came through here every year going to the reunions. And very memorable because the football team was or is the Red Devils. Are they still Red Devils, I guess? And the other team would have like 5 or 6 players taken off the field on stretchers, but there never seemed to be an ambulance to pick them up. But just play after play, they would haul off the other team on stretchers. Is that like a tradition down there or something? Y'all know? I don't know. It was extremely amusing. But the Masseys got into Spruce Pine, and there's a Massey Creek where they settled. And I assume it's named after us because I don't think they went to Massey Creek because it was named Massey Creek way back in the backwoods of Spruce Pine. And my father's grandmother said they couldn't see the sun until after 10 o'clock. And I never understood that until I got to where I live in Nashville, and we don't see the sun until about 11 o'clock, except in the winter when the leaves are off the trees. We're that down deep in this hollow. But I had an ancestor in the 5th Alabama Cavalry. He was from south of Franklin County. He was from Marion County. And most of these brothers ended up in Texas. Their last name was Stevens. They ended up in Texas, north of Dallas after the war. I never knew any of the Stevens. I feel like kind of like I ought to know them, but I really don't. And I think my last chance to have ever lived around here had an Aunt Esther. She died in Russellville the year I graduated from high school and left a house to my father. And I thought, I'll move down there and I'll go to North Alabama and live in her house. I guess he imagined that might be too much fun because he sold the house and I ended up at UT. But I grew up in Nashville, and about second grade, I realized that the battlefield was all over Nashville, and around where we live and all over Nashville. And it was a miserable showing by Hood's Army at the end of the war. And so I was never really that interested in the Battle of Nashville. I was more interested in where things happened. And I got to University of Tennessee, and I was studying for a calculus exam, and I knew I was going to flunk this test. So I went to the graduate library and went as far back into the far deepest corner that I could find so I could spend the day studying for this calculus exam. And I look over there on the shelf, and there's the official records. And I had probably seen a set once before, but for a minute. I thought, well, that's intriguing. I know what that is. And I pulled the one off the shelf for Nashville, and I started reading it. And I'd never read all this detail. The roads that the armies used in the Battle of Nashville were the roads that we drive on today. They all exist. And I couldn't put it down, so when I took the calculus test, I thought I'd flunked it. I've absolutely flunked it. And I went back to the house where I lived and told a friend of mine, I said, I don't understand it. I mean, one thing is useful as a business major is the formula for compound interest is calculus, but most of it, it made no sense to me. And all of a sudden, this friend said, well, differentiation or whatever it's called, and integration, therefore these kinds of problems. I thought, why didn't the teacher ever tell us that? It never made any sense. We had some miserable teachers there. And the university was founded in 1794, and they gave me a grade they had never awarded before, a D minus, minus, minus. And I should have flunked it. I don't know why they let me through, but it was a miserable experience. But that led to when I became an adult and I started driving around Nashville. By adult, I mean later 20s. I started just realizing everywhere I drove, there are these battlefield markers that the Historical Commission put up. And I just realized everywhere I went, I was on the battlefield. And I started learning about it. One of the peculiar things was with all these Confederate generals, I'd really never heard of hardly any of them. And I started thinking, why have I not heard of these? Well, because more generals were shot up at Peachtree Creek in Franklin than you can imagine. And so by the time you get to Nashville, these brigades are being led by colonels you never heard of. So that's really what got me interested in studying these generals. And when I looked at a lot of books, there was very little in them about a lot of these colonels that led regiments and stuff. So about the back third of the book is biographical pieces, pictures of their homes, their graves, things they did. Here's one guy, Millsaps, out of Nice. He went to Millsaps, like college over in Jackson, Mississippi. He's one of the officers. So about a third of the book covers them. I told somebody that was interested in Loring's division that I was trying to write a book on it, and he said, well, it could be 4,000 pages. Well, sure it could. I worked on it far longer than I meant to work on it. It came out 2 years ago in 2023. It's hard to give a program on it because you've got to figure out what you can't talk about. There's just not time enough to cover everything. And this picture went off. What is that? This is, you saw that this house still survives in Franklin. It's called Carnton. It was basically a field hospital for Loring's division. And there was a famous piece of fiction called Widow of the South, all based on the lady at the house, Carrie McGavick, setting it up. So the artist did not put Loring in the picture. This is just a sort of a generic painting, but it's a nice painting enough that I put it on the cover of the book. Loring lost an arm in the Mexican War. Again, my talk's it's not a biography of Loring. I'm not trying to give a whole story of Loring's life. It's really more of the division. Of course, Loring's the key figure, but he had an arm amputated with no anesthesia, smoking a cigar. I mean, it's incredible. And he called that the proudest moment of his life, losing an arm in the Mexican War. But this is one of those nice colorized pictures people have done. He was in Western Virginia and even Southeastern Virginia during the first few years of the war. I can't go into that. I will just say that he ran afoul of Stonewall Jackson. They had a difference of opinions. That's the short version of the story. Jefferson Davis had to sort it out and keep Jackson from resigning, which he threatened to do. But Davis did a very diplomatic thing and separated them. Loring is going to end up being sent to Mississippi at the end of 1862, and Pemberton was just replacing Van Dorn in charge of Mississippi. This is one of the big mysteries of the war. Nobody can quite figure out why Davis picked this man of Philadelphia/Northern birth to command in Mississippi. He had no battlefield experience, so that's going to be key to understanding Champion Hill in just a moment. No battlefield experience. I'm pretty sure I figured it out. Davis had so many friends from the North before the war. He was so well thought of by so many people in the North. I think he made a point with some of these officers that he wasn't against the Northern people. I think that's why he liked Pemberton, because logically, Pemberton, it's hard to imagine him being picked. And briefly, I'll just mention Grant's really the U.S. general that I find most interesting because he's their guy. And he's superstitious about ever going backward. So he keeps going forward. And once you understand, this is like a superstition, a fear, you can kind of understand how Grant just plods on a lot. He was smoking 25 cigars a day. I smoke either none or maybe 2 in a month. I guess these were the smaller cigars and not the big ones, but that caused throat cancer. My wife and I went to this house where he died in Mount McGregor, New York, a few years ago, and they were treating it with cocaine. There's still a jar on the mantle of water with a chunk of cocaine in it, and he died up there. But Grant is going to figure out a way to get to Vicksburg, and I realized this morning, I was looking through the book, because I haven't given this talk in quite a while. I was telling at dinner, this is 2/3 of this division is really Mississippi troops, both artillery and infantry. About 1/3 of it's Alabama, and most of it from these northern counties. A lot of ties to these Alabama regiments from up here. And then Louisiana's third. There's a 12th Infantry and a Bullshaw's Coupe, Point Coupe battery. So I've had a lot of speaking opportunities. I can't even remember when I've spoken on this. It may have been a year. I don't know. But if I was from Mississippi, I'd have probably had much more success with selling the book and having speaking opportunities. So I'm grateful y'all asked me to come down before I forget I wrote the book, because it's been a while. But Farragut had been down there. I was reading a biography of Van Dorn I brought with me in the room last night. And things, you read over the years, and you don't often put together how it leads to something else. But back in, say, July and August of '62, so a year before this Yazoo Pass, Farragut had come up. He had taken New Orleans in April, right after Shiloh. Farragut came up with like a flotilla. Memphis fell in June to another flotilla. And so now these two flotillas are coming down to shell Vicksburg. And they were there for several weeks, and they realized we really just can't be effective shelling this Gibraltar up here. And Farragut left. He quit. It was considered a victory for Van Dorn, Van Dorn's first real victory in the war. And so Farragut said it's going to take the Army to do it. And my mother's from the Delta, and her father, she was from right here in the Delta. And one of the things I didn't understand for a long time is the Mississippi Delta and the Mississippi River Delta are two things. I kept thinking, well, why isn't the Mississippi Delta below New Orleans? Well, that's the Mississippi River Delta, yes. But what they are talking about when they say Mississippi Delta is the Yazoo River Delta. So it seems like it would make more sense if they'd called it the Yazoo Delta. But she was from up the Sunflower River. The Tallahatchie comes down, and this is just, it's boggy. It's hard to get into Vicksburg because of all the bayous and swampy land. But Loring had built a fort right here called Fort Pemberton, where the Tallahatchie comes down, and that's where this fort is. They can't get farther down. So the U.S. Navy has come through a pass called Yazoo Pass. They cut a little bit of dirt and they got into Moon Lake. My mother's father had a boat on Moon Lake, and it's a big lake. And then they went on through this pass that got them into the Tallahatchie. But this is like something out of the African Queen movie with Humphrey Bogart and my wife's favorite actress. What's her name? Thank you. I mean, it's a jungle, and I can't take the time to describe all of this because it just takes too much time. But I mean, I'm going to read part of what a biographer of Grant named Woodward said about all of these bodies of water that are coming together. He said, the river contains the dripping rain of half a continent. One can hardly call it a river. It is one of the wonders of the world. It is to rivers what Pike's Peak is to a pleasant little hill. In that amphibious land one meets creeks and bayous everywhere. Roads end suddenly in a waste of swirling water flowing in the midst of a tangled forest. The river is higher than the land. That sounds like New Orleans. And levees of earth and stones strive to keep it in its course. But it escapes. Creeks flow from it, running strangely backward and upstream. In these drowned and stricken forests, one loses sense of direction. The world becomes a wilderness of yellow water, trees, trailing vines, but not altogether. There stands Vicksburg on its tall hill. So that's what this Yazoo Pass expedition is trying to do, is to reach a point where you can put troops on the ground. But when you're heading down the Tallahatchie and then the Yazoo to get to Fort Pemberton, it's nothing but just swampy land. They could not find a place to unload. There were, I believe there's 22 transports. That you can find this marker not far outside of Greenwood, right on the highway. I think it's 82 from Jackson going over to Vicksburg. And it's got, I believe, 22 transports. That's a lot of troops, a lot of troops. So that's the Tallahatchie. And then they're going straight into Fort Pemberton. And it's built mostly out of cotton bales and just piles of dirt. And they're going to be attacking it on 3 different dates in March with these gunboats coming. One of the officers who's going to end up having a brigade in Loring's division is Tillman. And he's the one who had the unfortunate job of Fort Henry on the Tennessee River, which was lost. It was flooding when he lost that in February of '62, and he had been sent to prison, and he had just gotten back. Tillman is a fine officer, and he's going to be killed at Champion Hill before you know it. But Tillman was helping sight the guns. At Fort Henry, they were in a floodplain. If the U.S. Navy had attacked it a day later, um, there would have been no battle at Fort Henry. It was flooded. And the people told these two Confederate engineers, see the watermarks in the trees? That's where the river gets every winter. Not every 500 years. Every winter the river gets there, and you're building a fort here? Terrible. And Tillman got stuck with this, poor man. This is one of the gunboats that's coming down straight at Fort Pemberton with the ability to shoot out the front. And maybe it was a lucky shot. Loring had one really big cannon, a 32-pounder. And almost as soon as they opened the port and ran these guns out, one goes blasting in the hole, killing about eight U.S. sailors in one whack. So Loring is dancing on top of the cotton bales during this naval assault, screaming, "Give them blizzards." So that's going to be his nickname. All the soldiers for the rest of the war are going to remember him as Old Blizzards. So these battles were in March of 65 at Fort Pemberton. This is one of the greatest moments of the entire war for Loring, arguably. We'll get to Champion Hill in a minute. So on May the 5th, a division is formed by Pemberton for Loring. And this was a brand new division. This is just a couple of days after Chancellorsville, so that's what's going on with Lee's army when they're forming this division. But Grant's coming; he's on his way. He's landed downstream. We'll get to that in a minute. Buford is a character. When Bragg and Kirby Smith went into Kentucky in the fall of '62, Buford was at his home in Lexington, Kentucky. He wasn't even involved in the war. He knew thoroughbred horses, and when the Confederates came into Lexington, mysteriously he just joined. And the reason really why Bragg pulled out of Kentucky is because they wanted to go in there and recruit. And the Kentuckians, Kirby Smith, they've got too much fat cattle, meaning they're just too comfortable. But one of the things that's important, I'm going off on a tangent, but the Confederacy had just started the draft in April, right after Shiloh. So the war's going on a year, so people are coming home without arms and legs, are not coming home at all. And so it's not logical to think that people in Kentucky are going to enlist in the Confederate Army at this point in time. Buford's going to end up with mostly Kentucky troops in his brigade. Here's another one, Winfield Scott Featherston, born near Nashville in Murfreesboro area. He became an attorney, was at Holly Springs, Mississippi. His house is still over there, his grave's over there. Featherston was at a boys' school around Columbus, Georgia, or in Columbus, Georgia, during some of the Creek Wars. And Winfield Scott was down there, but he was already named Winfield Scott, which is kind of peculiar because this is before the Mexican War. So, you can imagine after the Mexican War, for example, Winfield Scott's a hero, and somebody being born in 1850 being named Winfield Scott. But he's born in 1820. So I don't have the story on that. But Featherston had been in Lee's army in Virginia, and because the war was getting so close to home, Featherston wanted to come to Mississippi. So he's got one of the brigades, and we'll get to the other brigade in a minute. But this is what Grant finally did. He realized he couldn't come down these rivers. So coming down the Tallahatchie and the Yazoo to try to get into Vicksburg wasn't working. So he marches down through Louisiana, and he wanted to come across at Grand Gulf. And I think Shelby Foote wrote this was the biggest bombardment and failure the U.S. Navy had in the entire war. And it's just sort of a footnote because the outcome is, of course, Grant's going to win the campaign. But the Navy calls this like one of their greatest efforts. It was just a total failure to take this crossing. And so they found out, I think from a black person, that there was an old crossing that wasn't used anymore at Bruinsburg, and they could get across there, and which they did. So Grant's going to march up through Port Gibson, Bayou Pierre, Auburn. There's going to be a battle at Raymond, Jackson. I can't go into all the details, but this is what the key is Grant's marching up this road. And this Loring is the brainchild behind this idea. Again, Pemberton had no battlefield experience. Loring says we better hit him while he's moving because he's got us outnumbered. If we don't hit him while he's moving, we're in trouble. So this is gutsy. They're not sticking around in Vicksburg. They're coming out to hit Grant. Another general, Carter Stevenson, supports the idea. They basically sort of talk Pemberton into making this attack. So at least Pemberton's open-minded enough to take them up on the idea. It's going to be a disaster because Grant's going to turn and hit them. Grant's got 6 divisions and Pemberton's got 3. You can't see all the detail on this, so I'm just going to kind of show you. Grant had 4 divisions that were already headed toward Jackson, and they're north of Champion Hill. I'll show you some pictures of Champion Hill in a minute. Loring was left, trying to see the road name on here. Loring was left on this road down here. And so he's got these 3 brigades. Buford, I mentioned, Featherston, and then Tillman. Tillman got a new brigade, so that's more Mississippi troops. So there's 2 U.S. divisions down here. A.J. Smith, he's the one who raised hell in Mississippi. Mean person. Blair, they never attack. So I have friends actually, and they took a tour a little over a year ago of Champion Hill. There's people out there still giving tours that continually criticize Loring for disobeying orders to leave this position and come up where the battle's being fought. And Loring can't make Pemberton understand that he's holding the rear. It's all over for Pemberton if Loring doesn't hold the road in the background. And he's got to stay there. And the U.S. divisions are never ordered to attack. It's just sort of an artillery duel. And I'll show you some pictures along this road here in a minute. So Champion Hill's up here. This is where most of the battle's being fought. Grant's got 4 divisions sort of lined up this way, coming around through like that. There's other 2 divisions that are confronting Loring, Blair, and A.J. Smith are on this road. So they had been marching to try to get up to Jackson when the idea was to hit them. What happened was Johnston had been sent by Jefferson Davis over to be the department commander, and Johnston told Pemberton to turn around and come back. So imagine Pemberton's never even commanded a battle. He's marching to attack Grant's marching column, and then he gets orders to turn around and come back and unite with Johnston, who's got some troops up just north of this. So this is a big mess. You got troops marching, and now they got to turn around and march back. It's not a very good plan. Toward the end of the day, Loring's going to send Buford and Featherston up to where the battle's being fought. He's only keeping Tillman, where this star is on this road. That's all that's left, Tillman and some artillery. And, I mean, these are the absolute heroes of the day. And there's still people that just can't stand Loring. And they say that, he disobeyed orders. That's all they can focus on. Sid Champion gave me a tour not too many years ago. He's the descendant of this Champion family. If you go over there, if you're interested in any of this, get a tour from Sid. He even gives tours on 4-wheelers. You can see some of the terrain you go out and looking at. This is backwoods Mississippi. But when you get there, I mean, you don't feel like you're near anything. This is Champion Hill, and nobody knows what it looked like because there was a rock quarry on it the early part of the 20th century, and it just kept getting carved down. American Battlefield Trust has been putting up signage and buying land. But this is what I don't agree with. Everybody seems to think that this is where the Vicksburg campaign was won by Grant. He screwed it up terribly. I think he was drunk. I really do. And I'll probably get to that in a minute because there was a journalist named Cadwallader. And, I mean, if anybody doesn't think Grant was a drunk and during the war, after he takes Vicksburg, he goes to New Orleans and falls off his horse. After he took Donelson, he went to Nashville to party, and Halleck shelved him for a while. And, I mean, you can find other examples. I mean, why else would there be 2 divisions in the distance? So where Loring is in the distance. Most of the battles being fought pretty much here, with the U.S. troops advancing south toward Champion Hill. Loring's in the background holding this road. Why would Grant never order 2 divisions that are in position to strike, but never order them to attack? And there's no explanation that I can find. And people who've written books, that, like Timothy Smith, they don't seem to have any explanation. In the middle, there's some nice signage stuff to see. You really need Sid Champion to show you around. Generally, because it's tangled and it's not a national park. But Loring initially was over that creek. I just showed you the picture of the creek. Let me show you again. This is just boggy, unattractive looking land. And Loring was up on this ridge, and it was just an artillery duel. There's some woman out looking at her cows in my picture. She didn't know she was going to be in my story. I guess she could have charged me royalty. But some old woman out in overalls is looking at her cows. The battle's being fought off this way. This is a view looking sort of west in the Vicksburg direction. This Coker House is I believe the American Battlefield Trust bought the land it's on. It is a significant house, but it's empty. There's nothing in it. Do you know what? You can't quite see what this is in the distance, but you can see something's there, sort of. It's a chicken processing plant. Take an oxygen tank with you, it is a deplorable odor. Yeah, you can go in the house. Sid Champion took me in there. It's a house that you think, God, I could restore this house and live in it. If only they'd restore it. And Sid and I just walked in. They just had a storm and some trees were down. He's talking about he's got to go clean them up. But there is some older signage, I guess. I'm not sure who put this one up about Tillman, because he was on that ridge where the woman was looking at her cows, and he pulls back just a little bit farther going west, and he's still holding on to the rear. And that's the only thing that's saving Pemberton from just becoming a sandwich between all these Yankee divisions, and the fact that Blair and Smith never had orders to attack. But even though they didn't, when Pemberton finally abandons the battlefield, he's got to be able to get across this creek, Baker Creek. There's 2 crossings. This is an upper crossing, well, it says so. And then there's a lower crossing, and that was the critical one that had to be held, and there's no way to get to it. But that's what Tillman is guarding. In order for Pemberton's entire army, basically, to get off this battlefield and go into Vicksburg, Tillman's got to hold this position. And that's the flag that was. This is in the Confederate Memorial Hall in New Orleans. This is one of Loring's batteries, the first Mississippi Light. It's some of those old Van Dorn patterned sort of flags. Kind of interesting to see an artillery battery, but a number of the units still had these odd flags. They weren't flying battle flags. They're dueling. They realize that Pemberton's retreating behind them. Loring is going to get mortally wounded. He is making jokes with the battery commander, Cowan. They're making jokes about the Yankees are shooting at Tillman because he has a new uniform on. Tillman's son is right there with him. And the next thing you know, a shell goes through Tillman and kills him just that quick. The Coker House is in the distance. So there's never been a lot over there. But this looks like something from 100 years ago. I don't remember the date, but it's concrete posts with metal, and this memorial to where Tillman's mortally wounded. Another view of it. At Vicksburg, they put up statues and raised reliefs of people that weren't even necessarily in the battle at Vicksburg, but were in the campaign. And there's this remarkable statue of Tillman. They're just gorgeous. Bust of Loring's over there. I need to go back and give you an idea how this worked out. So the people who don't like Loring, which are in the majority, I'm the minority that thinks he was pretty significant. They think that he could have gone into Vicksburg with the rest of Pemberton's army, and he didn't, like he was a turncoat. But again, specifically Tillman holding that road as Loring ordered allows Pemberton to escape. In the meantime, the Yankees had gotten across that upper crossing I had a picture of, and they're coming down the west bank, the other bank. And so by the time Loring and Tillman have been conducting this rear guard, there's Yankees across the creek shooting at them. They can't get across. They've got to make an escape somehow. And I don't know why people just continue to paint this like he was a turncoat. He saved his division, and there was no reason for it to go into Vicksburg. Fortunately, we know what happened afterward because, I mean, they were starving to death. Their lines were never broken. They surrendered because they were starving to death. If Loring had gone in there, it would have just been more Confederates to feed. But he made an escape on a road that I asked Sid Champion if there was any clue where this road was, and he said no, it's part of that chicken plant's land. But there's some of the letters to Confederate veteran. Here's one from a T.A. Manahan, who wrote in 1894. General Loring came riding down our lines close up to us and was encouraging the boys and told us we'd been sold. That means they were stuck on the wrong side of the creek. But he was going to take us out. So with about 6,000 troops left, which would have been about a fourth of Pemberton's troops, Loring began marching them to the southeast. He had to slip around the enemy camps to accomplish this. T.H. Knight wrote from Texas years later, we then filed to the left and into a dark swamp and struck into an old road familiar to some man who had come to lead us out. He seemed to be nearly 60 years of age. The word was sent down the line, no man must speak above a whisper. While in the swamp, we could hear the Federals not 100 yards away, who thought they'd cut us off, but by marching all night, we got away. Another man, J.P. Ken, who was from right here in North Alabama, he wrote that we were in an unknown forest without a road or star to guide us, almost surrounded by a foe flushed with victory. Wagons and artillery captured and no rations in our haversacks. Staff officers were stationed all along the line of march, warning us not to speak above a whisper as we were passing between two bodies of the enemy. Their campfires were burning brightly on both sides of the road, and we steered as nearly as possible between them. And no doubt it was largely due to this that we were enabled to make our escape. For without those lights, the guide would have probably wandered right into their camps. What does this sound like to y'all? No kidding. But this is before Spring Hill, so it's not like they invented this maneuver. In 1896, a man wrote, Confederate veteran, we passed so near the enemy on the night of the 16th, that's the 16th of May, 63, we could hear them talking. As we were approaching a road which crossed the one on which we were marching, Loring learned that the enemy had a strong picket at the crossroads. He dressed a courier in a Yankee uniform, sent him to go up to the road and order the picket withdrawn. The picket obeyed the order, and they just marched right on. And one last thing about this is a man who was in the engineer corps. I don't know how you pronounce his name. Major J.T. Hogane, maybe? H-O-G-A-N-E, Hogane. He wrote for the Southern Historical Society papers in 1883, there was one man with sense, meaning at Champion Hill, General Loring. He absolutely refused to go into Vicksburg and declared to Pemberton he would not obey his order. I'm not sure that he absolutely told Pemberton he wouldn't obey his order. I think there was chaos at this point. I think that's probably not exactly correct because it was chaos. It was an unbelievable escape for the numbers that did get on in to Vicksburg to fight through the siege. But I mean, I think this was an amazing effort. So you've got two great moments for Loring. One right before the division was formed at Fort Pemberton, and the other there at Champion Hill. It's going to be another year before they end up in Georgia. So I won't go through a year because I've already used a half hour, but he's going to be in the Atlanta campaign. So Polk, Bishop Polk, a.k.a. General Leonidas Polk, has this army of Mississippi that's going to be ordered to come and reinforce Joe Johnston in the Atlanta campaign. The Atlanta campaign began just outside Chattanooga. So that's Ringgold, basically a suburb of Chattanooga. If this map went a little bit farther north, there's Chattanooga. Y'all probably have a good understanding of the Atlanta campaign. It's basically Joe Johnston being backed up from May of 64 up here around Dalton all the way back till he crosses the Chattahoochee and gets removed from command. So I can't give much detail. I want to mention Peachtree Creek because that's where Loring busted through. A friend of mine, now deceased, William Scaife, did more work on the Atlanta campaign and used to give tours that were outstanding. You really can't find too much of this line around Atlanta, because it's in the city. I mean, this is downtown Atlanta, but you can see some of these batteries, the positions are marked. Gabor's from Missouri, Ward's from Alabama, Barrett's from Missouri, and then we get to some of Loring's. Berry's Lookout, Tennessee battery was with Loring briefly, and then I think they were sent to Macon. They were gone. Bonchard's, that's the one. I'll mention him again in a minute, from near Baton Rouge, Point Capay Parish. He's there. Cowan's, this is the battery that Tillman was with when he was killed. And then you start getting the Lumsden's. That's a famous battery out of the University of Alabama. There's one place left, and it's Grant Park, where you can still see some of the fortifications, and I'll get to that, I think, in a minute. But when Johnston pulled back across the Chattahoochee, it was really unexcusable, and I had to keep my mouth shut around Mr. Scaife because he worshipped Johnston. And I mean, you'd have to look at the positions he was in and how well he handled the campaign defensively, and what Sherman and Sherman's generals thought about Johnston to know that they had a tremendous amount of respect for how Johnston handled the campaign. But when he pulled back across the Chattahoochee, this was just overwhelming to Jefferson Davis in the War Department, and that he was always sort of cryptic and just gave these answers like I can't tell you what I'm going to do next. Circumstances will dictate, that kind of answer. So he was removed from command, but he had a plan on the north side of Atlanta to strike the Yankees after they came across the Chattahoochee, and they're crossing Peachtree Creek. That's not very clear where that is. Have any of you all been to Peachtree Creek and looked at any of that? It's absolutely beautiful what some of this looks like. It's right in Atlanta. I used to live in Atlanta, and they've improved it so much from when I was there 4 decades ago. You can walk and see it. It's still a little hard to understand what's going on, but I'll show you some of these pictures in a minute. Picture of Loring without his arm. Look at the empty sleeve. Thomas Scott, he's one of the Louisiana people over the 12th Louisiana. It wasn't like Loring was the only one that fought well at Champion Hill. I seem to imply that a minute ago. No, Bowen and Scott and other of these people, I mean, there was some good fighting, but they really had no chance. Loring was, to me, the ultimate hero in that he covered the withdrawal. But Scott was one of the ones who's in this Peachtree Creek battle. There's Winfield Scott Featherston, his bust again. Hood tried to take Johnston's plan and to strike when the Yankees are coming across Peachtree Creek. At the same time he's hoping to do this, he's realizing that Sherman's moving an army out to the east side of Atlanta. Have y'all seen the cyclorama? Everybody seen that? That's incredible. So the cyclorama focuses on that fighting east of Atlanta. That's called the Battle of Atlanta. So the way this attack was supposed to take place was early afternoon at the latest, and then Hood starts trying to get his entire line up at Peachtree Creek to move over toward the east part of Atlanta. And it's not just like, let's move the table across the room. This is an enormous project that took hours. And so by the time it's done, the attack that he planned is just an obsolete plan. It reminds me of playing chess. I was never very good at chess because I always had a plan, and before I could implement it, somebody screwed it up by moving their piece in my way. People always say, "You played a good game." Yeah, but I lost. I mean, and that's Hood. I mean, he just did not realize his plan wasn't going to work, and then he tried to blame it on Hardee for the delay when it was really his plan was falling apart. I lived right in downtown Atlanta, and I never really realized how much there was scattered basically in downtown. If you can picture I-75 going into Atlanta, like coming from Chattanooga into Atlanta, Loring Heights subdivision is like on top of it. This stuff's right in Atlanta, named after Loring, from the position where he started the attack. There's signage there. And it's like a lot of this stuff when you're driving around in city traffic and these things are on the side of the road where there's nowhere to pull over. I used to see these all the time when I lived in Atlanta, and I had an opportunity to study them, and I just really didn't. I was doing some other things. But Scott's Brigade, you can see markers along Peachtree Creek where Scott's Brigade broke through, where the Featherston's Brigade broke through. And these are detail markers. They're not easy to read. You've really got to have read before you go see them to get much out of it. That position where it's called that subdivision named for Loring Heights, this tenured branch is heading like straight across under 75 and up to Peachtree Creek. And you drive around Atlanta in this swarm of traffic, and you just don't realize that there's these beautiful creeks right there running through Atlanta that are battlefields. Look at this. I mean, it looks like something in the Smokies or something, doesn't it? Or maybe around here. Look at the rock. This is in the middle of one of the nicer subdivisions or areas of Atlanta. And this is where Loring's moving up this tenured branch to attack. This is one of Mr. Scaife's maps. He was really precise about him wanting to locate units on these maps. He was a big motivation in my life. Polk was killed. Y'all probably know that at Pine Mountain. And so Polk's corps went to Alexander P. Stewart, a very good general. And so you're going to see these divisions that are going to be in the Atlanta campaign now and on into Tennessee. French, he's got Hector Cockrell, and there's another one named Sears, another brigade under Sears. Walthall's got brigades. Walthall was good. Walthall and Loring were both able to break through. There's Scott and Featherston. Scott takes a flag off a New Jersey regiment. They're breaking through this, but as they break through, they both get their lines enfiladed, and they're blaming these troops over here, such as Manny, for not having already attacked. And it's hard to make sense out of it because, again, like I said, Hood's delayed this so many hours that whatever areas these generals might have reconnoitered a few hours before, it's all irrelevant now. Bate, who got moved over, he's at the far end of Hardee's line. Bate got tangled up in something called Clear Creek, and he was lost, basically. He thought it was Peachtree Creek, and it wasn't. He never really got into action. And so there was a lot of holdups in this, and it's just another one of those unfortunate battles. A lot of people get killed, and not much is accomplished. I'm not going to get into the details. I'm getting to where I need to speed it up. But the book goes into a number of these officers that I don't think some of these people should be forgotten, and typically they are forgotten. Here's one of the ones you'll read about in the book. This is one of the things I like about the Sons of Confederate Veterans is they take care of graves. This is some SCV members taking care of one of the colonels, Moses Jackson. They restored his grave somehow, and there's his picture. The Atlanta campaign resulted in Jefferson Davis's third trip to the Western Theater, and he should have removed Hood. I really like Jefferson Davis. There's no doubt in my mind and most historians the Confederacy could have never survived and fought as long and well as it did without somebody with his military mind. He'd been Secretary of War under Pierce. He made mistakes, but every time I think about him making a mistake, I think about he put Robert E. Lee in command. And Robert E. Lee was kind of a joke at the point he put him in command. He was called the King of Spades for digging. But Hood should have been removed from command. I mean, anybody who's got an arm shot up and then a sling and they're missing a leg, they shouldn't be commanding an army riding in the field. It's just too difficult. So after Spring Hill, I can't go into all the details, but y'all basically know what happened at Spring Hill. The idea that he's going to attack this entrenched U.S. Army without virtually no reconnaissance is inexcusable. So Hood's got his pluses, but there was really no reconnaissance. He's going to order a charge into an entrenched position from 2 miles off. And this is what's interesting. This drawing was done by a U.S. newspaper correspondent, or the correspondent and artist with him. I've asked people who've studied Franklin, like Thomas Cartwright, if y'all know him, if he's ever seen anything like this, because why would an artist for a newspaper draw some of this if it didn't exist? That's serious. I mean, I wouldn't want to attack that. Loring is going to, again, attack over near the river. They're going to use Carnton as a field hospital, and I'll show you where Carnton is on the map. The McGavick House. You might want to point to the right. So here's the U.S. line encircling Franklin. Not to mention they already had a fort built from 1863 up here on this bluff. And when you get these brigades, regiments lined up way out here on the outskirts, 2 miles out, and you're going in. It's like wagon wheel spokes, and as you get closer and closer in, they're all going to get tangled up, which they did, and it was just a mess. Loring attacked Walthall for getting in his way, and Walthall was a gentleman enough to say, General Loring, you know where to find me when this is over. But it was a mess. Adams gets killed. He's not very well remembered today. Adams, I believe he was in the class where Pickett was, George Pickett. And one of the things that's been pointed out in a biography written on Adams, Pickett is remembered for a charge he didn't lead. Adams is forgotten for a charge he did lead. He was trying to jump over it's a bust of Adams. He was trying to jump over the earthworks when he and his horse were killed. This is a brigade flag. There's some good signage up. They call this the Eastern Flank Battlefield. So the most famous part of the attack is Claiborne and Brown's divisions under Cheatham going straight up the Columbia Pike toward the Carter House. Loring had more killed than Claiborne. And this part of the battlefield had been a golf course, and most of it had been forgotten. But now there's some pretty good signage. You can get out there and walk and follow this. That's the Civil War Trust map where they show all the units and how they're moving in.
Can you go back to that last map? You know, the thing about them being next to the river, that fort insulated their whole line as it got closer and closer to the Union position. So,
there's a big controversy, and somebody helped me with it. A guy named Sam Huffman helped me with it. Let me see if I can get to where I can explain it. I will in just a minute. I'll go back if I have to. That's Carnton in the distance, the McGavock House. So that's looking back south the way Loring's division came across their property to attack. And you can kind of see that. Doesn't it almost look like golf course turf? Some nice signage there with Adams' picture. That's Loring at the top. That's Adams. The Eastern Flank, that's what they call this area, advancing with Scott's brigade. This is the Lewisburg Pike. So if you were standing at this point, the McGavock House, Carnton, is kind of to your back left, over your left shoulder. That's the Lewisburg Pike going straight into Franklin. U.S. artillery all entrenched up here in the distance. The Harpeth River's on their flank. This is, I'm going to need to get to your question because it's a very good one. Okay, so there's Carnton, and Loring's moving basically this way, parallel to the Lewisburg Pike and the river. And there were some writers after the war who said that a U.S. battery was somewhere over here enfilading their line. And there was a number of people who wrote that they were standing by a bridge crossing, and they never saw any artillery battery go over there. Actually, where the artillery was, according to Sam Hoffman, I think he's right. You see, the river is turning, and it's going like that. There was a U.S. artillery battery right about there, and the angle it was shooting at made them think that there was one across the river. It was almost ahead of them, but the position was their shells were coming over the river twice. I've canoed it, so you got in a canoe and you can kind of understand how that river twists. That artillery fire was crossing the river twice.
So the artillery from Granger couldn't reach the Confederate line? That's another big mystery, is there were some big guns up there because Granger's a permanent fort, but everybody seems to agree the big guns weren't used. Yeah. Okay.
There was some artillery up there, and there was so much smoke from up where Granger was. I'm not sure they could really see where they were firing, but the big guns, it seemed to be, everybody agreed that the big guns in the fort weren't used. But that battery, where I was showing you on the map, there was a U.S. battery here on this high ground by the railroad cut. The river's down here. It crosses the river, goes over some level terrain, and crosses the river again to hit Loring's people in the flank. They're getting shot to pieces. So there's been some more land bought in recent years by this American Battlefield Trust group, and it's part of where Loring attacked. That's part of it. And this is right in the middle of a nice neighborhood in Franklin, and I don't know what their plan is. They're calling it Loring Park. That's view one, another view. But all of this is the route that Loring's people are taking. Adams it has probably gone right through this before Adams hits the U.S. line. McNutt Hill is 650 yards, and that's where, there it comes across the river, if I'm looking at this right, where it comes across the river twice. I'm having a hard time seeing that with no color. Sam Huffman took me there, and we walked around and looked at it, and it seems like that's where this artillery was that they thought was across the river. It's pretty close, really. Adams is going to be killed trying to jump over the earthworks. He'll live briefly. Again, Loring's division suffered higher casualties, even Claiborne's. Mississippi had the highest number killed, 424. Imagine that. Just unbelievable. This was my problem, as I mentioned earlier. When I got to looking at the Battle of Nashville, basically in the late 80s and early 90s, I started thinking, how come I've never heard of these people? Well, that's because they're brand new to command. Adams was killed, so this man named Lowry ends up getting Adams' brigade. He's just been another obscure colonel, and that's, again, the kind of people I covered in the book. Snodgrass. Scott was basically so badly wounded. He survived, but Snodgrass was from North Alabama. He was from Scottsville, and some of these people's descendants are still over that way in that part of North Alabama. So I grew up in Nashville, and these are all roads that we drive on all the time. And so, I mean, I went to church most of my life, a little church right in front of this position. And I mean, we're driving through this all the time. The Battlefield Group, my good friend Wes Schaffner loaned the Battlefield Group money for Redoubt 1. You can go and see part of the remains of it that are preserved. I had DUI convicts for a year working on number 2. And one day somebody called me and told me a developer had run a pipeline through it. So that was my battlefield experience reward for that one. 3's basically gone as a little hole of dirt. But there are still things to see in Nashville. There really are. They're just scattered and hard to find. This is a map I developed with a person who had computer expertise. Loring is at this salient position. There's Adams's old brigade, now under Snodgrass. Then Scott's now under, I said that wrong, Adams was under Lowry. Scott's under Snodgrass. Featherston. This man was in virtually every battle of the war, it seems, and he never got injured. Very blessed for him. It's like a vice. So Stuart, at this point, has got this left corps, and he's probably, in my opinion, the best Confederate general at the Battle of Nashville, because Forrest isn't there. Stuart's a very solid person. If you were going to have a General, Stuart probably be one you'd like to have. But this represents the 4th Corps, U.S. Army Corps, coming straight out of Nashville. These were Smith's, A.J. Smith's people brought in by steamboats. Another corps, the 16th Corps troops. Then there was dismounted cavalry with repeater rifles. And then right about the time the battle starts, Thomas decides to throw Schofield in. So this is a vice. You're looking at over 40,000 U.S. troops against about 6,000 Confederates. So, and particularly when you take the odds of all these repeater rifles this cavalry's got, there's absolutely no chance Stuart can hold this position. When you just look at Nashville, sometimes you think, well, these not good troops. Well, Stuart had, at New Hope Church just a few months back of the Atlanta campaign, was being assaulted by Hooker's Corps, and it got Johnston and Hood worried that you need to be reinforced. And Stuart just called me and said, no, my own troops will hold the position. And that was New Hope Church. So they knew when they couldn't hold. And Walthall and Loring were standing there looking off in the distance saying, we better get out of this while we still can. And they did it without permission from Stuart. But as soon as he realized what they were up against, he said, you did the right thing. This is Redoubt 1 I just mentioned. The battlefield groups got it. This was overgrown in bushes until we had our SCV camp cleared it. And I'd been going there all my life. And I always thought, well, I know I'm up high, but I can't quite figure out why the Confederate engineers put this in their line. Now you can see downtown. When you stand there and look at where the cannon are pointing, there's downtown Nashville off in the distance. You can see why they were there. There's still earthworks going all through yards, churchyards, and houses. Redoubt 1 I just showed you, it's right through there. The trench lines come through here. You can see the humps of dirt where the trench lines are coming through the Unitarian churchyard. This Captain Alcide Bolshaw had this Louisiana artillery battery, and he was ordered to cover the withdrawal. And he's got one Mississippi regiment stops and stands with him, the 22nd Mississippi, which was from Tishomingo and county. And so Bolshaw's all spoke French, and I imagine the Tishomingo people didn't, but they managed to to hold it off. And none of the books on the Battle of Nashville had ever mentioned this story. I found it in a book in the Tennessee State Library and Archives. It was a biographical registry a lot of the states did about a century ago of famous people in their state. And it gave this incredible account of Bonchard and that Mississippi regiment holding off all that Yankee force till Walthall and Loring could get back out of the way. I used to go to Mardi Gras every year. I got a good friend down there, and I was sitting in a restaurant not long before the book came out, so about 20 years ago now, and I was telling him that I had found this incredible story. All these people had written books and they didn't know it. I said, I'm the only person in the world that knows this story, and I'm about to put it in my book on the Battle of Nashville. And there's a guy sitting at the next table, and he knew the story. He heard me talking, and he knew the story. Thomas Donnelly. This is going to be like a 1 in a billion chance. I'm telling my friend with my loud, booming voice, I'm the only person in the whole world that knows this story. And this guy, I know the story. I've talked to him since. I talked to him a few years ago on the phone down in New Orleans. And he's been in roundtables and stuff like that. So he was a student of the war. It wasn't just a total fluke. But Bonchard deserved to be remembered. Cowan, he's the one that was with Tillman when he got killed. He lost 3 guns, and Greg and I were looking at this debatable, but it's also confusing. But at least one of the guns was on the river here. I think one of them wasn't from him. I think one of them was from another battery.
They must have gave him another gun.
I think they did, and I think I know which battery gave it to it, but I'm going to skip that for right now. Where they got
that was down at the riverbank of Florence. So
yeah, so they're from Vicksburg. Cowan's from Vicksburg. Darden, he lost all 4 of his, and these are great batteries. I mean, you find them fighting at Murfreesboro in different places. That's the old OR map, just showing some of the first day of fight. Like in Atlanta, there's a Loring Heights. We've got a Loring Court in Nashville. This is where Loring was on the second day. So the first day, they got just in that vice. You'd think that Hood would have just left the battlefield and called it quits. Every Yankee general that night thought that Hood would be gone in the morning. Thomas was staying in the hotel, St. Cloud, and he went down to the lobby to check out to go fight the battle. I mean, this has got to be the only battle in the history of this planet where a general goes down to the lobby and checks out to go fight the battle. And apparently he's gone all the way back to the hotel that night, and they're back at the hotel 6 miles away discussing it. Schofield's the only one who thought that Hood would still be there in the morning. And Schofield, without tearing into Schofield too much, Schofield, there's no doubt in my mind, his nervous system was still torn up from Franklin. He went through one ordeal there, and he had not recovered. But Adams' old brigade, now under that Mississippi Robert Lowry, they're behind this fence, and these are roads we drive on. People live here. Bonchard's had 2 guns right in this yard on the 16th, and they saw Shies Hill, this salient point, fall. And I know what they probably thought. Here we go again, trying to cover the retreat. But they lost their guns on the 16th. What was happening at Nashville, and particularly on the 16th, is the horses were being killed. So the artillery batteries had to move their horses to keep them from being killed. They were still getting killed because a lot of this was wide open farmland and cornfields, just wide open mud. And they moved them to a 3rd position to keep them from being killed. And at that point, they were too far away. So when they saw the line breaking, even if they'd had the horses up, it was so muddy, I think they would have lost a lot. But that definitely explains the loss of so much artillery at Nashville, is they couldn't get the horses up. This is one of the people I cover in the book, Berryhill. He had written the last letter to his wife after Franklin, telling her how horrible it was. And at the same time he was writing her, U.S. cavalry down in Mississippi was trying to burn the house. She was begging the U.S. troops not to burn the house. She had 4 or 5 children. She said, all I've got to give them for Christmas is a roof over their head. And they turned the house on fire. And when they disappeared, rode off, I think it was cavalry. The children helped her pull burning furniture out to save the house. But he's buried at Nashville now.